The signal came without warning on a cold morning in December. Every radio on Earth picked it up at the same time. Every television screen flickered. Every phone buzzed with the same strange sound. People stopped in the streets and looked up at the sky, feeling something had changed forever. Commander Lisa Grant was drinking her coffee when the alert came through. She worked at the United Nations Space Division, a small office that most people forgot existed. They tracked satellites and watched for asteroids. Nothing exciting ever happened there. But when she saw the readings on her screen, her coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. The signal was not from Earth. It was not from any human satellite or probe. It came from somewhere beyond their solar system, and it carried a message. Lisa called Admiral Kevin Porter immediately. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 30 years in the military and thought he had seen everything. But when he arrived at the office and saw the decoded message, his face went pale. "They want our help," Lisa said quietly. "Someone out there is asking humanity for help?" The message came from something called the Galactic Coalition. It was an alliance of 12 different species from 12 different worlds. They had been watching Earth for a very long time, studying humans from a distance, wondering if they would ever reach the stars. Now they were reaching out because they had no other choice. Admiral Porter called an emergency meeting in Geneva. Leaders from every nation gathered in a large hall, their faces showing confusion and fear. Holographic screens floated in the air, displaying images that none of them could fully understand. Dr. Maria Sanchez stood before the assembly. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied the possibility of alien life. For years, her colleagues had laughed at her work. Now they all stared at her in silence. "The Coalition has been fighting a war for over a century," Maria explained. "Their enemy is something they call the Void Swarm. These creatures consume everything. They eat planets. They drain stars. They have destroyed 17 star systems in the last 10 years alone." The screens showed images of dead worlds. Planets that had once been green and blue were now gray and lifeless. Cities that had housed billions of beings were now empty ruins. The Void Swarm left nothing behind. President Daniel Hughes leaned forward in his chair. He was a young leader, only 52 years old, and he had never imagined facing something like this. "Why us?" he asked. "We barely have ships that can reach Mars. What can we possibly do against something that destroys stars?" Maria took a deep breath before answering. She had asked herself the same question 100 times since decoding the message. "The Coalition species evolved on stable worlds," she said. "They developed in peaceful environments where resources were plentiful. They learned to cooperate, to avoid conflict, to solve problems with logic and patience. When the Void Swarm came, they tried diplomacy. They tried running. They tried building better defenses. Nothing worked." She paused and looked at the faces around her. Kings and presidents and prime ministers, all waiting for her to continue. "Humans evolved differently. We came from a world that tried to kill us every day. We survived ice ages and predators and diseases. We fought each other for thousands of years. We developed something that the Coalition species never needed." "And what is that?" asked the Prime Minister of Japan. "Aggression," Maria said simply. "Stubbornness. The refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat is certain. The willingness to fight and die for something beyond ourselves. The Coalition thinks these qualities, the ones we often consider our greatest weaknesses, might be exactly what the galaxy needs right now." The room fell silent. On the screens, the images continued to play. Worlds burning. Creatures made of darkness spreading across the stars like a disease. Admiral Porter stood and walked to the center of the room. He had been a soldier his entire life. He had trained for battles that never came, prepared for wars that existed only in theory. Now, a real war was waiting among the stars, and someone was asking him to fight it. "I spent my career hoping I would never have to send young men and women to die," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I also spent my career knowing that sometimes dying for something greater than yourself is the most important thing a person can do." He looked at the assembly, meeting the eyes of each leader in turn. These aliens have watched us for centuries. They have seen our wars, our cruelty, our endless capacity for violence. And now, when they face extinction, they are asking us for help. Not because we are the best option, but because we are the only option left. The debate lasted for 3 days. Some argued that humanity should stay out of a conflict that did not concern them. Others said that helping would drain resources Earth desperately needed. A few suggested that the whole thing might be a trap, a trick to lure humanity into space where they could be easily destroyed. But in the end, one argument won out above all others. If the Void Swarm defeated the Coalition, what would stop them from coming to Earth next? The universe was vast, but not vast enough to hide forever. The vote was unanimous. Every nation agreed to contribute ships, soldiers, and resources. For the first time in human history, the entire planet was united under a single cause. Lisa Grant was appointed to lead the communication efforts with the Coalition. Her first task was to send a reply to the original message. She sat at her desk for hours, trying to find the right words. How do you tell an alien species that you are willing to die for them? In the end, she kept it simple. This is Earth. We received your message. We understand your situation. We are coming to help. Please send coordinates and any information about the enemy. Humanity stands ready. She pressed send and watched the signal disappear into the vastness of space. Somewhere out there, beings she had never met and could not imagine were waiting for that message. They were hoping that a small species from a small planet could somehow save them from the darkness. Lisa did not know. If humanity could win this war, she did not know if any of them would survive. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had to try. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the mountains. Children were playing in the streets, unaware that their world had just changed forever. Ships were already being designed in secret laboratories. Soldiers were being recruited and trained for battles that would take place light years from home. The age of isolation was over. Humanity was about to take its first steps into a universe far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, an ancient enemy waited. Unaware that its greatest challenge was coming, the brave were about to answer the call. 18 months passed like a fever dream. Factories that once made cars and phones now produced ship parts and weapons. Universities that once taught history and art now trained navigators and engineers. The whole world worked together with a speed and purpose that previous generations would have thought impossible. Captain Nathan Cole stood on the observation deck of the carrier, Durance. Watching the final preparations, he was 43 years old, with dark hair that was starting to show streaks of gray. He had spent 20 years in the Navy commanding ships that sailed on water. Now he was about to command a ship that sailed between stars. The Endurance was the largest vessel humanity had ever built. It stretched nearly a kilometer from bow to stern, carrying 5,000 crew members and enough supplies to last 3 years in deep space. Smaller ships surrounded it, like children gathered around a parent. Destroyers, cruisers, medical ships, supply vessels. 300 ships in total, all preparing to leave Earth behind. Lieutenant Amy Peters appeared at his side. She was young, only 25, with short brown hair and bright eyes that never seemed to rest. She had been a physics student before the call came. Now, she was the navigation officer responsible for getting them across the galaxy. The jump drive modifications are complete, she reported. We should be able to outmaneuver anything the Void Swarm throws at us. Nathan nodded but said nothing. He was thinking about the people below, the 5,000 souls who had trusted him with their lives. Many of them were young, barely out of training. Some had left families behind. All of them had volunteered, knowing they might never come home. Are you scared? Amy asked quietly. Nathan considered the question carefully. He had been trained to hide his emotions, to appear strong and confident even when he felt neither. But something about Amy's honest face made him want to tell the truth. Terrified, he admitted. But I think that is the point. Being brave does not mean you are not afraid. It means you go forward anyway. The launch ceremony was broadcast to every screen on Earth. Billions of people watched as the fleet rose from shipyards scattered across the planet. In New York, crowds gathered in Times Square, cheering as the ships disappeared into the clouds. In Tokyo, people lit candles and prayed for safe passage. In small villages and great cities, humanity watched its children leave for war. President Daniel Hughes gave a speech that historians would remember for centuries. "Today we send our best into the unknown," he said. Not for glory, not for conquest, but because somewhere out there, people we have never met are suffering. And we cannot turn away from their pain. That is what it means to be human. We help, even when it costs us everything. The fleet gathered in orbit around the moon for final preparations. From there, they would make the first jump to Coalition space, covering distances that would take centuries at normal speeds. The jump drive technology was still experimental, borrowed from Coalition designs and modified by human engineers. Nobody was completely sure it would work. Admiral Kevin Porter remained on Earth to coordinate support efforts, but he insisted on speaking to every captain before departure. When Nathan's turn came, the old admiral looked tired but determined. "You are carrying the hopes of 2 species now," Porter said through the communication screen. "The Coalition has lost hope. They have watched their worlds burn for 100 years. They do not believe victory is possible anymore." "And you think we can change that?" Nathan asked. "I think we have to try. Show them what humans are capable of. Show them that giving up is not in our nature." The first jump was terrifying and beautiful. Space folded around the fleet like paper being crumpled. Stars blurred into streaks of light. The ships shook and groaned as forces they did not fully understand pushed them across the galaxy. Then, suddenly, they were somewhere else entirely. The Coalition fleet was waiting for them at the edge of the Orion Arm. Nathan had studied images of alien vessels, but nothing could have prepared him for seeing them in person. Ships of every shape and size filled the space around them. Some were sleek and elegant, like works of art. Others were massive and industrial, built for function rather than beauty. Thousands of vessels representing 12 different species, all gathered in one place. Commander Vexari of the Vessian Republic was the first alien to board a human vessel. The Deshans were tall beings with blue skin and large eyes that seemed to look through everything they saw. Vexari moved with careful grace, studying every corner of the Endurance's landing bay with obvious curiosity. Nathan met the alien commander with a formal salute. He had practiced this moment 100 times trying to imagine what he would say. But when Vexari stood before him, all his prepared words disappeared. "Welcome aboard," Nathan said simply. "We came to help." Vexari's translator device hummed for a moment before producing words in flat mechanical English. "You brought 300 vessels. We lost 3,000 at the Battle of Keth Prime. Your contribution is noted but unlikely to change the outcome of this war?" Nathan smiled. He had been warned that the Coalition species were direct and logical, unused to human customs, like politeness and encouragement. "We did not come to match your numbers," he said. "We came to fight differently." The joint briefing that followed was held on a massive Coalition station that served as their military headquarters. Officers from every species gathered in a circular room, holographic displays showing maps and battle plans. The human delegation was small compared to the others, but they had brought something the Coalition lacked. Colonel Patricia Webb commanded the human ground forces. She was a hard woman with short gray hair and scars on her hands from a dozen training accidents. When she presented human battle doctrine, the room fell silent. "We do not believe in fair fights," Patricia explained. "We believe in winning. We use ambushes, traps, and deception. We attack from unexpected directions. We sacrifice pieces to gain advantage." Admiral Trenko of the Unified Worlds leaned forward. His species were mechanical beings, their bodies made of metal and circuits. His voice came out as a series of clicks and tones that the translator converted to English. "You would sacrifice your own ships? Your own people?" "If necessary, yes," Patricia replied without hesitation. "We would sacrifice ourselves if it meant protecting what matters. That is not something we are proud of. It is simply who we are." The coalition officers exchanged looks that humans were still learning to read. Some seemed horrified. Others seemed intrigued. Vexari stared at Patricia with those deep blue eyes, calculating something that none of the humans could understand. "Your species is very young," Vexari said finally. "You have only been in space for a century. You have not learned the wisdom of patience and preservation." Nathan stepped forward to stand beside Patricia. "You are right," he said. "We are young. We are impatient. We are often foolish and violent. But we are also here. When the Void Swarm came for your worlds, your ancient wisdom told you to retreat. Our young foolishness tells us to fight." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, Vexari made a gesture that the humans would later learn was the Decian equivalent of a smile. "Perhaps," the alien commander said, "foolishness is exactly what this war needs." The Void Swarm came for Nexus Station on a day that should have been ordinary. The station was a trading hub, a massive structure that floated in space like a city made of metal and light. Over 2 million beings called it home. Merchants from a dozen worlds sold their goods in its markets. Children of species that had never met Earth laid together in its parks. Then the alarms started screaming. Captain Nathan Cole was eating breakfast when the call came through. He dropped his fork and ran for the bridge, his boots pounding against the metal floors. All around him, crew members rushed to their stations, their faces showing the fear that training could not completely hide. The main screen showed the approaching threat. The Void Swarm emerged from subspace like a wound opening in reality. Millions of creatures poured through, each one a twisted combination of machine and biology. They absorbed light itself, making them appear as moving holes in the universe. Looking at them hurt the eyes and disturbed the mind. "Coalition fleet is forming defensive positions," Amy Peters reported from her navigation station. "Standard retreat formation. They are preparing to evacuate the station." Nathan watched the coalition ships spreading out, creating distance between themselves and the enemy. It was the same tactic they had used for a century. Buy time, save what you can. Accept losses as inevitable. "How long until the swarm reaches the station?" Nathan asked. 47 minutes at current speed. "And the evacuation?" "Impossible to complete. They will save perhaps a third of the population. 2 million people on that station. If they followed the coalition plan, over 1 million would die today." Nathan thought about the families in those corridors, the children who would never grow up, the dreams that would end in fire and darkness. He made his decision. "Signal all human vessels. We are breaking formation. Attack pattern Delta." His first officer, a young man named Stephen Park, looked at him with wide eyes. "Sir, the coalition has not authorized an attack. Their protocol requires a coordinated retreat." "I know what their protocol requires," Nathan replied. "Signal our ships. We are attacking." The human fleet moved as one. 41 vessels, including the Endurance, separating from the defensive line and accelerating toward the swarm. On coalition command frequencies, confused voices demanded explanations. What were the humans doing? Had they lost their minds? Vexari's voice cut through the chaos. "Human commander, you are breaking formation. Your vessels will be destroyed." Nathan opened a channel to respond. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "Commander Vexari, there are 2 million people on that station. We did not travel across the galaxy to watch them die. Either support our attack or stay out of our way." The human ships formed a wedge with the Endurance at its point. They were outnumbered thousands to 1. The swarm had destroyed fleets 10 times their size without slowing down. By every logical calculation, they should have been running away. Instead, they charged. On the Nexus Station observation deck, a young engineer named Chris Martinez watched the battle unfold. He was Thesian by birth but had studied human culture ever since the strange species from Earth arrived. He did not understand them. They seemed so fragile, so short-lived, so prone to emotional decisions that defied reason. Now he watched their tiny ships racing toward certain death, and something stirred in his chest that he could not name. "They are insane," whispered his colleague. "A mechanical being from the unified worlds? They are throwing away their lives for nothing." Chris shook his head slowly. "No. They are throwing away their lives for us. The battle began at 2300 hours station time. Human weapons were different from anything the swarm had encountered before. Coalition technology was precise and elegant, designed to disable enemies with minimum waste. Human weapons were loud, violent, and terrifying. Nuclear missiles detonated in chains throughout the swarm's formation. The creatures had never encountered fission weapons before. Their bodies were designed to absorb energy, but the raw destructive power of splitting atoms overwhelmed their defenses. Hundreds of them died in the first minute. The swarm reacted with confusion. Their hive mind, ancient and patient, had learned the patterns of coalition warfare over centuries. They knew how to counter precision strikes in defensive formations. But these small ships attacking head-on, accepting damage, they could not survive, or something new. The Endurance took a hit on its starboard side. The impact threw Nathan from his chair, and warning lights filled the bridge with red. Amy Peters shouted damage reports over the noise of groaning metal. Decks 7 through 12 are compromised. We are losing atmosphere. Casualties unknown. Nathan pulled himself up and grabbed his console. Maintain attack vector. All batteries continue firing. More human ships fell. The destroyer Steadfast exploded in a flash of white light. The cruiser Resolution broke apart under concentrated swarm fire. But for every human ship that died, they took dozens of swarm creatures with them. Something strange began to happen. The swarm, which had never hesitated in its long history of destruction, started to slow. The hive mind was processing new information. These humans did not flee when wounded. They did not stop fighting when their ships were dying. They kept coming, kept attacking, kept sacrificing themselves. The swarm had conquered 100 species by understanding fear. But humans were showing them something they had never learned to counter. Defiance, coalition. Commander Vexary watched from the command station, unable to believe what the sensors were showing. The swarm was retreating. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm was pulling back from an attack. "Impossible," said Admiral Trenko, his mechanical voice carrying something that might have been wonder. "They have never retreated. Never." Vexary stared at the screen, watching the remaining human ships pursue the fleeing swarm. Their formation was broken, their vessels damaged, their casualties mounting. But they were winning. "Signal all coalition vessels," Vexary ordered. "Join the human attack. Full offensive." The battle lasted 11 hours. When it was over, 87 human ships had been destroyed. Thousands of human lives were lost. But Nexus Station stood, its 2 million residents alive and safe. Nathan Cole was found in the Endurance's medical bay, his arm in a sling, and his face covered in burns from a console explosion. The ship was barely functional, held together by emergency repairs and desperate hope. Vexary came to see him personally. The tall Veshan stood in the doorway, studying the wounded human commander with those deep, unreadable eyes. "Should have died today," Vexary said. Nathan looked up at the alien who had become something like a friend in the months since their meeting. "Probably," he admitted. "But those civilians on the station should have died too. My life for 1,000,000 of theirs seems like a fair trade." Vexary was silent for a long moment. The Thessians were an ancient species who had developed philosophy and art while humans were still living in caves. They understood the universe in ways that humans could barely imagine. But standing in that damaged ship, looking at that wounded man, Vexary realized something important. The humans had come to teach them something too. "Your species is remarkable," Vexary said finally. "You fight as if death does not matter." Nathan shook his head slowly. "No. We fight as if death matters more than anything. That is why we risk it for others." Outside the medical bay window, the swarm's retreat continued. For the first time in a century of war, the darkness was running from the light, and the galaxy began to hope again. 5 years passed in fire and blood. The war that the Coalition had been losing for a century became something different with humanity at their side. Victory was still uncertain, but defeat no longer felt inevitable. The human fleet grew as reinforcements arrived from Earth. New ships, new soldiers. New volunteers who had watched the Battle of Nexus Station and decided they wanted to be part of something greater than themselves. The original 300 vessels became 1,000, then 2,000. But the Void Swarm learned too. The creatures began hunting human ships specifically. Their ancient hive minds studied human tactics and developed counters. They created new weapons designed to pierce human armor. They changed their patterns to avoid human ambushes. The war became a deadly dance between two enemies who refused to stop adapting. Captain Nathan Cole, now promoted to admiral, stood before a holographic map that showed the current state of the conflict. Red zones marked territory lost to the swarm. Blue zones marked coalition victories. The colors swirled together like paint mixing on a canvas, neither side gaining lasting advantage. Lieutenant Amy Peters had been promoted to. She now commanded her own ship, the cruiser Determination. She had changed in 5 years. The eager young physicist who had joined the fleet was gone, replaced by a hardened warrior who had watched friends die and kept fighting anyway. "The swarm is adapting faster than our models predicted," she reported during a strategy meeting. "They are specifically targeting human vessels now. Our casualty rate has tripled in the last 6 months." Admiral Vexari, who had become one of humanity's closest allies, studied the data with concern. "Your species has made remarkable contributions to this war, but we cannot afford to lose you. Perhaps the human fleet should take a secondary role." Nathan shook his head. "We came here to fight, not to hide behind others. If the swarm is targeting us, that means we are hurting them. We push harder." The war spread across 100 star systems. Human soldiers fought alongside coalition warriors on planets they could never have imagined. They learned to communicate without translators, picking up words and gestures from a dozen different species. They learned alien customs and taught their own. Coalition beings developed a taste for human music, while humans discovered literature and art from civilizations millions of years old. But the cost was terrible. On the colony world of New Geneva, Sergeant Laura Kim led her squad through the ruins of what had been a beautiful city. The swarm had landed ground forces for the first time, creatures that walked on 2 legs and carried weapons grown from their own bodies. They moved through the streets like shadows, hunting survivors. Laura was 32 years old. She had been a teacher before the war, instructing children in history and literature at a small school in Oregon. Now she carried a rifle and led soldiers into battle. "Contact ahead," whispered Private Eddie Reyes, the youngest member of her team. He was 19, born on a space station during the early days of the fleet's journey. He had never seen Earth, never felt real sunlight on his face. The war was the only world he had ever known. Laura raised her fist, signaling the squad to stop. Through her scope, she could see the enemy patrol. 6 of them, moving through the rubble with unsettling grace. Their bodies shifted and changed as they walked, adapting to the environment with every step. Corporal Diane Fisher crouched beside her, checking her weapons charge. Diane was from Australia, a former athlete who had traded running for combat. She had lost her brother in the Battle of the 3 Moons and had not smiled since. 6 against 4, Diane said quietly. "Standard doctrine says we fall back and report their position." Laura thought about standard doctrine. She thought about the civilians hiding in a bunker 2 kilometers behind them. Families who had fled their homes, children who cried themselves to sleep every night, old people who remembered when the stars meant hope instead of fear. If the patrol found them, everyone in that bunker would die. "Standard doctrine did not win us this war," Laura said. "Eddie," Diane flank left. "Kyle, you are with me. We take them down fast and quiet." Private Kyle Wong nodded silently. He was the squad's heavy weapons specialist, a massive man who rarely spoke but always delivered when it mattered. He had carried Eddie on his back for 12 kilometers when the young soldier was injured during the siege of Crystal Harbor. The ambush was brutal and quick. Laura drew the patrol's attention with a carefully aimed shot that took down their leader. While they turned to face her, Eddie and Diane opened fire from the left. Kyle's heavy weapon thundered, cutting through the creatures before they could react. 30 seconds later, 6 enemy bodies lay cooling in the rubble. Laura stood over them, her rifle still smoking. "Sergeant Kim," Eddie said, his voice shaking despite his efforts to control it. "How do you do it? How do you just fight knowing you might die?" Laura ejected her spent magazine and loaded a fresh one. She had asked herself that question many times during the long years of war. The answer had changed as she changed. "'Cause someone has to," she said finally. "And if not us, then who?" Those people in the bunker did not ask for this war. They cannot fight for themselves. So we fight for them. Gaëté nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Diane looked away, hiding emotions she did not want to show. They moved on, hunting more patrols, protecting more bunkers. The war continued around them, vast and terrible, but their small corner of it remained human. Soldiers fighting not for glory or conquest, but for the simple belief that protecting strangers was worth dying for. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out every day. Human pilots flying suicide missions to protect evacuation ships. Human medics running into fire to save wounded aliens. Human engineers working without sleep to repair critical systems. The Coalition had never seen anything like it. Admiral Trenko, the mechanical being who had once questioned human sacrifice, sought out Nathan Cole during a brief moment of peace. "I have studied your species extensively," Trenko said, his translated voice carrying something like wonder. "Your history is filled with violence and cruelty. You have committed terrible acts against your own kind." Nathan nodded. He had never hidden humanity's darker nature from their allies, and yet Trenko continued. "You also show remarkable capacity for love and sacrifice. Humans have died protecting beings they met days ago. Your soldiers weep for fallen comrades from species they cannot even properly pronounce." "We are complicated," Nathan said simply. "Yes, but I am beginning to understand that your complications are your strength. You feel deeply. You care fiercely. You fight with passion that pure logic cannot match." Nathan looked out at the stars, at the countless worlds that needed protecting. "We are also stubborn," he added. "We do not know when to quit. Some would call that foolishness." Trenko made a sound that might have been laughter. "I have spent centuries pursuing wisdom. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps what this galaxy needs is not wisdom. What does it need?" Trenko turned to face the human admiral, his mechanical eyes glowing softly. "Heart, something to believe in. A reminder that fighting for others is worth any cost. Your species has given us that gift, and we are forever grateful." The war continued. Victories and defeats blurred together into an endless struggle. But something had changed. The Coalition no longer fought just to survive. They fought to win. And standing beside them, bleeding and dying and refusing to surrender, humanity showed them how. The war ended not with a grand battle, but with a choice. After 5 years of fighting, human and Coalition scientists working together made a discovery that changed everything. Dr. Maria Sanchez, who had decoded the original distress signals so long ago, led the research team that finally understood the Void Swarm's origin. They were not always monsters, Maria explained to the assembled leaders. Her hair had gone gray during the war years, but her eyes still held the same fierce curiosity that had driven her entire life. Millions of years ago, the swarm was a peaceful species. They called themselves the Vethkai, and they were artists and philosophers. The holographic display showed images that the scientists had reconstructed from captured swarm creatures. A beautiful world with golden skies. Beings made of light and music, creating wonders that made the gathered leaders gasp in wonder. A dying star changed them, Maria continued. The radiation twisted their biology and their minds. They became what they are now, creatures of hunger and destruction. But deep inside the swarm, protected by millions of her children, the original queen still exists. The last pure Vethkai. Admiral Nathan Cole leaned forward in his chair. The years of war had changed him too. His hair was completely gray now, and scars marked his face and hands. But his eyes still held the same determination that had driven him to charge into battle at Nexus Station. "You are saying we can end this," he said. "By reaching the Queen." Maria nodded slowly. "We have developed a device that can restore her original consciousness. If we can get it to her, she can shut down the entire swarm. Every creature across the galaxy would simply stop." Admiral Vexori rose from his seat. The Thessian commander had become one of humanity's closest allies and dearest friends during the Long War. The Queen is protected by the entire collective. Reaching her would require passing through the densest concentration of swarm creatures in the galaxy. No fleet could survive such an assault. A fleet could not, Nathan agreed. But a single ship might. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what he was suggesting. A suicide mission. Someone would have to carry the device into the heart of the swarm. Knowing they would never come back, coalition representatives shifted uncomfortably. In their cultures, such sacrifice was difficult to accept. Life was precious, to be preserved and protected. The idea of willingly giving up existence for others went against everything they had evolved to believe. Nathan Cole stood. His uniform bore the marks of 5 years of war. Half the crew he had left Earth with were dead, replaced by new faces that had become just as dear to him. "I will go," he said. The room erupted in protests. Coalition admirals argued that it was wasteful, illogical, a terrible loss of an irreplaceable commander. Human officers insisted they should draw lots, make it fair. Amy Peters, now a captain herself, demanded the right to take his place. But Nathan had already made his peace. He had known from the moment they left Earth that this was how it would end. Not with victory parades and medals, but with someone staying behind so others could go home. "I have given orders my entire life," he said quietly, and the room fell silent. "I have sent thousands of men and women to their deaths. Every one of them deserved to go home to their families. Every one of them had dreams and loves and futures that ended because of orders I gave." He looked around at the faces he had come to love. Human and alien alike, they had become his family during these years of war. "Let me be the last one. Let me give the order that saves everyone else." Vexari stepped forward and placed a long hand on Nathan's shoulder. The gesture was deeply intimate in the Shen culture, reserved only for the closest bonds. "You do not have to do this alone." Nathan smiled sadly. "Yes, I do. That is the point." The preparations took 3 days. The Endurance was stripped of everything except essential systems and the restoration device. Her crew was transferred to other vessels, leaving Nathan alone on the ship that had been his home for 5 years. On the day of the mission, the entire fleet gathered to watch. Every human ship broadcast messages of thanks, of love, of remembrance. Coalition vessels added their own farewells in a dozen different languages. Amy Peters made the last transmission. She stood on the bridge of her ship, tears streaming down her face, and spoke the words that humanity would remember forever. For Earth, for the Coalition, for everyone who will not have to fight after today. Go with our love, Admiral. Go with our gratitude. Go with everything we are and everything we hope to be. Nathan looked at the screen one last time. He saw Amy's face, saw Vexari standing behind her, saw representatives of every species who had become his family. "It has been an honor," he said simply. Then he turned off the communication system and set course for the heart of the swarm. The Endurance flew alone into the darkness. Around it, millions of swarm creatures gathered, sensing the approach of their ancient enemy. They attacked with everything they had, but Nathan's flying was perfect. Decades of training and 5 years of war had made him one with his ship. He dodged and weaved through the swarm, taking damage, losing systems, but never stopping. The creatures could not understand why this single vessel kept coming. They had seen human stubbornness before, but this was something beyond even that. This was love. Love for the people he was protecting. Love for the galaxy he was saving. Love for the future he would never see. For 17 minutes, the fleet waited in silence. Then the sensors showed something impossible. The swarm was stopping. Across the entire galaxy, trillions of creatures suddenly went still. Their connection to their queen had been severed. The ancient hive mind that had driven them for millions of years fell silent. They drifted lifeless among the stars. Like leaves falling from a dying tree, the war was over 100 years later. A monument stands on the Coalition's capital world. It lists the names of every human who died in the war. Soldiers and scientists, engineers and medics, Civilians who volunteered for dangerous duty? Thousands of names carved in stone that will last forever at its base. In every language of the Coalition and of Earth are the words that Commander Vexari spoke at the war's end. When the darkness came, many species ran, many hid, many gave up hope. But humanity answered the call. Not because they were the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced, but because they were brave. And sometimes bravery is enough. Alien children visit the monument on school trips. They learn about the strange species from the small blue planet who charged into battle when retreat was the logical choice, who sacrificed themselves for strangers, who refused to accept that some enemies could not be defeated. And somewhere, on a rebuilt Earth, new generations look up at the stars and know they belong there. Not as conquerors, but as protectors. Not as the strongest, but as the ones willing to try. The galaxy remembers what humanity taught them. That courage matters. That sacrifice has meaning. That fighting for others is the noblest thing any being can do, and in the quiet moments between stars. When travelers pass through the space where the final battle took place, they sometimes swear they can hear a voice, a human voice, carried on the solar winds, speaking words that echo through eternity. It was worth it. Every moment, every loss, every sacrifice, knowing that you are safe, knowing that the children will grow up in peace, knowing that the darkness is gone forever, was all worth it, and the stars shine on. Bright and eternal, watching over a galaxy that learned the meaning of bravery from the small, stubborn, beautiful species called humanity, the ones who answered the call.